Welcome back to Side Quest 19, Final Fantasy VII, Episode 7. And back with us is Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, Mr. Wesley Schantz.
Hey, good to be back. Number 7. Okay. I wasn't sure. That
Yeah,
sounds
I
good to
know.
me.
I know. It's been a while. We've been playing at a fairly leisurely play. We've been engaging in a leisurely activity at a leisurely pace. Gentlemanly,
Yes.
in fact. Yeah. Well, and so this time around, I took some notes and I wanted to throw out sort of some quick bullet points, some topics we might want to hit on, and then we can bounce off those or go in a totally different direction, whatever we wanted to do. But I also wanted to give you some love for your most recent finishing of Bookworm Games and your talk about sort of limitation and spatial or how you have to limit something or stop it at some point to give it form. And Aristotle, in fact, says you must define the limits of something in order for it to be an object. And I was thinking a lot about that before we got on here. And it's interesting when we talk about developing a corpus that something is taking shape, right? And now we've collaborated on something like 60, 70 episodes total, something like that, with other hosts and alone. And it's interesting to what extent you do define yourself in time by how you use time, and that your corpus or body of work time starts to take form, and that form is reflective of you and who you are and what your time is, but that also it takes best and most definite form when you define the limits yourself. And I think that's sort of what Dante was a master at, and what you were hinting at in starting or stopping at 33 episodes, that you hit on a symbolic meaning that is far more important, and Kant would agree with this in his critique of pure judgment, than is pure expression of subjective experience. And so I feel like, go on. Yeah.
I haven't read that part of Kant's work, but I find it really interesting, that he and Aristotle are two of the ones who are very tuned into the idea of limitations of distance of objectivity in art, as opposed to, I think, the sense that you get a lot of times from other writers and thinkers is that it is more about the expressiveness, right? And I like that you bring up Dante too, because I think he's a master of kind of blending the two and capturing his expressiveness, the particularity and the emotion within that framework of crystalline, thought.
Yes.
Which is just awesome.
And
thanks for that.
When you tether yourself to a game, it's sort of like nailing yourself to a cross. You give yourself definite form. And when you give your expression a goal, you give meaning to that expression, and you actually burn away the unnecessary parts of it, right? Like there's no reason why you should have a dumb serve in tennis. Like the best possible serve is the serve that gets you the fastest and most accurate serve. And so you move in a way that's totally pragmatic. Well, there's no reason why every action in your life shouldn't be the exact same way, and especially a major project. And this seems to be our life's project. We've been very explicit about this being our opus magnus, our magnum opus, rather, for the Latinists, the magnum opus, the great work. And it's interesting because, the MC Escher piece of art where the artist's hand is drawing the other artist's hand and they're drawing each other all at once. I think of the imagery of the Father and the Son, where as you create definite objects, you also see yourself in those objects. You see not only the idol or the object that you create, but you see yourself through your development of your art through your objects, and other people can see that. And that's far more valuable to them even than a physical development. Though I would say, bodybuilding sort of embodies that principle, right? You see somebody's transformation from sort of average to exceptional. And you can see that not only physically, but also in one's articulations of information and their personal experiences as they refine their technique and they become more acute observers. And what they express becomes more and more valuable because it's more and more insightful, because it's more and more practiced.
I like that. And I like well, the serve, right? Like you got the power and the placement, but you have also got the spin, so there's always
Yes.
that spin that you got to worry about too. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's a good analogy to
It
think
is
about.
interesting. That is very human that, there's that element of fraud in the serve. Like you don't know which way they're going. And then also
Dial.
you get nasty spins. That's right. To make the ball do incredible things that other humans are good at adjusting to incredibly. We are amazing creatures. But so, some of these bullet points. There's a dream in black and white and dialogue suggesting that maybe Cloud doesn't know who he is. There's then a hero and maiden myth, a Cloud saving Priscilla from a dragon. I wondered if that foreshadowed Cloud saving, say, Tifa in the past, which is suggested by the dream. We also get the Shiva materia then, and I actually got that, but you're required to get that, so no kudos there. You don't get a pat on the back for the job you're supposed to do. So let's see. Ooh, I should talk about the negative unknown. We see the airship. Wow, what a scene. The high wind, incredible, very much majestic. We see a Shinra room, and then, oh my gosh, Cloud puts on the uniform, and that he's worn a uniform like that before. I was so proud when I first put it on, and then I can't remember when I couldn't stand it anymore. Why would he be wearing a uniform like that? Though later, when you're near the Mako reactor, there is a guy who's studying for soldier who is in a Shinra uniform. So maybe we can let him get away with that, but I don't know. Very telling. Yeah. Then we see the port and the giant gun scene. Wow, yeah, there. So the aspect of the father shooting out into the great unknown, and in fact has already shot Sephiroth apparently. Though I think I'll see him on the ship soon. I didn't quite get to where you did, so we're exchanging.
Okay.
We're exchanging rates of play here. That we also have this new age of Shinra with this sort of Nazi red banner theme with Rufus on it, and these shows of authoritarian might and parades and this like sort of Straussian waltzes going on.
Yeah.
And we see the poverty around, so it's sort of like Soviet and East Germany all at the same time. We see a place called Respectable Inn, which is interesting because you get called, okay, Mr. Know-It-All, soldier, let me review. What is going on there? Talk of a thing called Extreme Limits. I'd never heard of that before. And then you sort of see a clone of you and 135th soldier. You get that. Sorry, these are the last notes. Yeah, and then you find out that Hojo resides. All right, good. So
yeah,
I know.
All right,
yeah,
so
we got something on the board.
I remember also, just to put a first swerve into this conversation. Yeah. We last time talked a little bit about summons.
Yes, actually, I wanted to get right there. Shiva.
Yeah, so let's pick up from that point where we left off. So we had a lot of talk last time about chocobos and serpents and dragons and whatnot. Right. And so this time you arrive at Junon and you get thrown into a boss battle, which kind of, in a way, like makes up for the fact that there was no boss battle back in, you escaped the Midgar Zolom and you battle against the Turks. They just sort of talk to you and then leave. So I found that kind of interesting how it formed the sort of the supplied the missing boss battle that you'd been expecting for a while now.
Yeah, that's very
and it comes out of the blue. Yeah. Okay. But and then this fight against the sea monster, it's a long range battle, right? So you don't get to use physical attacks too much, unless your character's got a long range weapon or you've got the materia equipped. So it is like a bit dreamlike in that way, I thought.
Yeah.
It's sort of like sunset and this like sort of out of nowhere sort of thing that happens, and suddenly you're fighting this monster, right? And it is pretty hard fight, actually. It's not like it's not guaranteed that you're necessarily going to win that one first try, but if you sort of have prepared, you got some materia equipped, then you sort of feel pretty awesome when you do win, because then you've fulfilled this hero thing. You've saved the helpless innocent from the dragon, and you're rewarded, as you say, with a sweet new summon spell. Especially if you missed Chocobo, then this might be your first one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I completely agree with that interpretation. That's exactly how I wrote in my notes as well. You are now, just like we talked about last time, with hints of the rebirth of the hero and Cloud forming that role and providing the world-saving function as wielder and embodier of logos, is now actually playing like sort of the small-time, like traditional, like RPG town hero role, right? He like shows up into town, immediately makes a major impact. What he does is he saves a girl who's all of a sudden, and this seems to be the theme of the town mystery, and perhaps, you know, the theme of the fall in small and large manifestations. She's hanging out with her dolphin friend, and then boom, things change from known to unknown territory. Immediately, the threat shows up. It's a sea serpent. Who knows what that actually is, but symbolically speaking, that means a hero needs to show up in order to sort of set the situation right. And that's precisely what you and your team do. You act out the myth of the hero, and like you said, you get Priscilla. She then comes and she helps you. She gives you a way into she provides herself as a step on the process to the next goal, which is part of your superordinate goal.
I had something interesting about that it sort of goes to the political stuff going on upstairs in the main Junon town. It's the whistle, right? Because she gives you the whistle to have the dolphin, you know, help you jump up real high.
Yes.
But up there, when you're changed into the soldier outfit and you're in your disguise, it's the little lieutenant guy who's blowing the whistle to tell you when to you know, march and do all your different things with the gun. So you've sort of become the dolphin. You see what I'm saying? It's like you respond to the whistle, a little Pavlovian. Of course, you're free to not do it, right? But you get rewarded if you do it well, which I found really interesting. So that's just like a little weird thing. I don't know what to make of that parallelism there, but I noticed it this time through. Never had before.
That is interesting. That's very information rich. It's so information rich that it's sort of oblique to me right now. It's sort of
I mean, it could be overreading, you know. It's like he has a whistle because he's, you know, keeping everyone in time, and that's how you do it when it's loud and there's, you know, the cheering crowds, and the soldiers are trained to respond to it. But I just found it sort of funny that this the only child down there in Lower Junon, or the Undertown, has got the same thing that the leader of the marching soldiers has got.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I guess I could do a couple things with that. It seems like we are highly imitative as a species, and we like to imitate and look at high status creatures more than or high status humans more than low status humans. Just like macaws prefer to look at high status macaws rather than low status macaws, and you know, look at every celebrity magazine. Like, is that, you know, who are the people in there? Are they millionaires that you're looking at? Yes, almost certainly. You care about what they do without even perhaps knowing why. Like if somebody were to say something interesting about Brad Pitt to me, even if I thought myself like sort of above that sort of thing, I'd still sort of be naturally interested, frankly speaking. And people can say they wouldn't feel that way, but I highly doubt that. I think they're simply being contrarian because it would have such a major cultural impact because that person is so high status, right? And you know, that's, I think, part of the Trump phenomenon as well. People can't help but watch him because regardless of whether they're revolted by him, he is tremendously high status. And, you know, just even from like an economic point of view, which is, you know, I think a major point of view. But not a condoning of anything, simply an observation that is perhaps, you know, relieving to some people for why they can't escape being so passionately interested in this sort of thing. I think it's particularly afflicted our generation with our access to social media.
With social media, man. It's and that's funny too, because he takes, who is it, Barrett or somebody takes the PHS from you before you get in the water, and so you're taken away from the rest of the party. You are, and you can't communicate with them. You're on your own, climbing up there from. So yeah, I found that so strange. And then when you get up there, you're sort of thrown into a new bunch of people all of a sudden.
What about that? How authoritarian it was, and you were joining up, and it's like a major regression or is it like sort of the path of the hero that you've just had this major victory followed by a major regression? You try and fit back into a role you've expanded out from, already.
Mhm.
And you just sort of take it for this low reward, which is the HP plus materia, or that's what I got. You may have played the role better, but I played it pretty well this time, which I thought was some growth on my part, that in the mini games I didn't just get fed up and do whatever, or not play it as well as I could because I felt like I didn't need to. This time I tried to get
Yeah,
as
yeah,
high a rating as I could. And I think that's a better way of playing
totally.
because that is the game and that is life. And I am playing the game of life as I play the game. Um,
It's it seems to be sort of like the game taunting you as well, right? Like, will you lower yourself to play these little mini games,
yes.
like the 135th soldiers that you find, right? Like you're miniaturized here. You're just one of the stormtroopers, soldier again, and so you find these things scattered around, but in finding those, you also find the mind source, the speed source, the power source. So it's like by exploring this kind of mini game area that, there's this kind of regression to what Cloud was, or has sort of blocked from his memory that he was, or
Mm-hmm.
something. You also find the seeds of incredible strength, right? Like he's the only one in your party, so most likely you're going to use those things on him. He's the one you're going to have in your party the most often, so he's the natural person to give those things
Yeah. And
to build stats.
perhaps it's not so much a regression as a humbling, that he's acted the hero
Mm.
once, but he's not yet capable of embodying the form of hero, or like, which I guess you could take Super Saiyan to be a correlate for. That he can only do it for a very short amount of time. And very quickly, he, like one of us, could be knocked back out of the archetype of the hero, back into like mundane, normal life, identifying with sort of the herd, like sort of one of the voiceless many. Um, and so it's the game sort of reminding you. And so because I parallel this with the fact that Sephiroth's legend is just getting bigger and bigger, you find out that he's killed a
Yeah.
few people at Junon, and that there's a man with a black cape, and his legend is very much alive, and that seems to be what that's a metaphor for. Sephiroth, even though probably dead, his legend is still alive. It kills people. Incredible. Like that is a living legend. And you're just a little, and you're just reduced to a nothing again in his wake. And
It's great.
and so that is so appropriate too. Like I would say, even for say our task, right? Like we are those clouds who are reduced in our everyday life back to nobodies, while these people like Kant and Plato and Aristotle stand as idols, like gods above us. But they are like gods in that they are ultimate objects of desire, because we wish to embody the same principles as them, but in an even more relevant and sharper and pragmatic way. We wish to improve on them. You don't aim for Dante, you aim past Dante towards the ideal that he got close to, but you got to Robin Hood that and hit the arrow even straighter.
That's cool, because so this brings us back to the summons, right? So this Shiva summon is a god.
Yes.
And it's Priscilla's pendant that she gives you. So for some reason, this little girl, apparently the only child in the town left, or whatever, has got this this powerful materia, which summons an ice queen, who strews diamond dust across the battlefield and hits all enemies for heavy ice damage. It's really cool because you literally sort of embody that goddess during the summon, and you can only use it once at first, but if you build up its power, right, it gains power through its embodiment in you over time. And the more that you build it up, the more that you can use it, the stronger that it gets, the more that it sort of recovers its ideal nature or something, until like Sephiroth's materia, it's mastered,
right,
and it produces a baby materia, which is a great. We don't know about that yet, of course. We haven't got that far.
But that's incredible, because that seems to be what the process of building consciousness is, and ultimate capacity or skill or mastery in an endeavor. Because the first bit of consciousness is you go from sort of patches of consciousness, patches of ability to sequence time and reality and the narrative structure of your environment around you into a consistent narrative. And it seems to be that what sort of the rest of your life is sort of interweaving and observing the largest possible stories that are going on and that have been going on throughout all history, and that you happen to be an active participant in this particular moment. And so, sorry, I'm losing my track right here. I'm interested in two of your ideas. The one that as you are making, or so when you master the materia, you create a baby materia, but you said you embody the god, and you can embody the god once, and then you can embody the god more times. Well, I saw this, and tell me if you think there's anything to this. I potentially saw the Shiva summon as the ability, like a Patronus, to summon a memory of yourself acting heroically, because that's something that Cloud shares with her, and what that pendant symbolizes, an act of heroism, and thus like a favor from her to a knight for his great deed. And because of that great deed, because we iterate the patterns we start, he can potentially summon it and do another great deed with that as motivation, and then start to, just as you master the materia by being able to summon it more into the same battle, you become more capable of summoning into yourself the capacity to act heroically in a situation. And until it's mastered, and you can use it as much as you want, because it is now second nature or part of your conscious arsenal, an actual tool.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to think about the materia metaphorically like that, because then it's not just the summons, right? So it's sort of different. Each one is a little bit different how it grows. The summons grow in that you can summon them more times, and the regular old magic materia, the green ones, grow in power. They become stronger spells. Right. The blue, the all materia, you can use the thing all on all foes or all friends more than once. So it's like a summon in that way. And so in each case, there's something that's particular to the materia itself, but there's also something that is how it sort of manifests, how you embody it or manifest it, and each one also refers to a specific point in the game at which you acquired that materia. And some of them are like significant to the plot, like oh sorry, the cat just jumped on me. or like Shiva, she represents a unique plot moment and a unique relationship with you and the girl and the dolphin. But others, and chocobos like that too, right? You play wark dances with the chocobos, and you get the. But others are sort of just you can buy them at the store, So it runs the gamut, and it's very interesting how it's up to the player to what extent, if at all, you want to sort of like interpret that and think about what's actually going on. But it certainly invites it, especially with Shiva here, and you get Ifrit at the end of the cargo ship, so it's sort of the counterpart. But we can talk about that next time if you haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, and isn't it actually the image of Sephiroth, and you've seen him for the first time, who throws that at you?
It's dropped, by his emerging from the floor of the cargo ship. Oh, it's terrifying. It's awesome. But you mentioned you got the HP plus materia, so I wanted to go back to the ratings game thing that's going on there, right? So apparently, if you get lower than a certain threshold, you get like some items maybe. If you get between a couple thresholds, you get the HP plus. I looked it up after playing through. Yeah, but if you get above a certain threshold, you get a weapon for Cloud. You get a sword.
Cool.
That has double materia.
Oh, that's incredible. I think I've got that. Cool? I'm sure you've got that nailed, but I see that very clearly now.
I like that, right? So it's like the progression seems to be right, like item which you use and then it's gone, then materia which grows with you, of course, but then the thing which grows the materia is the greatest, right? The sword, the logo seems to be the thing, but you get this as a gift for propagandistic behavior, which again brings me back to the whistle. It's like, what is going on? So that's the part I'd like to talk through a little more. So go with that.
It strikes me, at least on the positive end of it, like what Peterson talks about, where you have to like what Nietzsche talks about with Roman Catholicism, you have to tether yourself to an endeavor very, very hard in order to train yourself so that you can gain access to the free expression of logos. And that's sort of what Dante is expressing. The act of the purgatorial mountain is you sort of purge yourself of these bad habits of thought. You learn the great stories and the meaning of them. And then boom, your will is freed because you no longer even have a desire to pursue the low passions, because you now understand the fundamental heroic story of man. And you're going to pursue that because that's the way to heaven, essentially, the exploration of unknown territory for all time. In this case, what's so interesting is that you play your role, your definite role in society, your sort of nameless role. And if you play it really, really well, poof, the logos appears in you. It's sort of like if you devote yourself very, very diligently to your training, poof, all of a sudden you have all these tools available to you, and then boom, you develop higher consciousness because you now literally have actually having a new game because of all these tools that you have access to. You can now do things within the game of Final Fantasy VII or life that you would not otherwise have been able to do. You would not have generated the connections that generate the consciousness necessary to wield these tools without first having the tools developed in yourself. And you can't know that before it happens, right? Like a gymnast only knows they can, like, say, win a gold medal after they do an incredible floor routine, which at some point they started with just being able to do a flip. And even before then, just like a desire to want to be able to do a flip at some point. And it's like, look how far they come exponentially, which I think is also part of the growth potential of that sword. So I've just finished Ray Kurzweil's How to Create a Mind, and he says something interesting. Because our brain is built on like several 100 million pattern receptors, there's massive redundancy, and it's built to perceive linear progression. So 1, 2, 3 basic lists. But what it's not built to see, which is how many things work in the world, like size of anthills, distribution of wealth, distribution of of size of star and size of tree, is exponential growth. Many things in the world work exponentially, and I think it's the same way with when you tether yourself to a particular role and you learn a certain amount of skills. You then have to generate the requisite amount of consciousness to deal with those skills. So as you build the skills, you build higher consciousness, even though it's like an act of enslavement as you build those skills through rote practice, largely.
That's interesting. It's like the
master slave.
Leap from the linear. I was just gonna say, like, the numerical thing again, though, just like the leap from the linear growth, which is plodding, which is methodical and discipline heavy and not all that fun, to the exponential, to even recognize that there is exponential as a possibility, and how that's like the explosion of freedom, like you say, at the end of the Mount Purgatory or something like that, right? Like that's somehow emerges from a dedication, a devotion to the practice, and the steady incremental growth. Yeah, I like thinking about that a lot. So the master slave thing. Well, so you've got you've got Heidegger also in running behind us people for his own messing up, right? And being publicly shamed by Rufus in front of the soldiers. So he then proceeds to try to attack the slaves, right? Why is his name Heidegger? Like, what's going on with that?
Well, it's interesting. And so I was mostly referring to master and slave just because of you enslave yourself to a skill in order to master it and then be free to use the skill. And so and that does seem to be sort of the story of like all Japanese animes made for young men. I forget there's a name for it, and maybe a listener can help us with that. But the ones like Bleach and like Dragon Ball Z, where like they're very training heavy, and then you develop skills and then you use them in a competition, and then the game continues to develop and you have to develop new skills, and then there's a new level of competition which produces a new level of growth in you, which is a metaphor for consciousness, which is why they can fly and become blonde, because they become enlightened beings, right? Though also they become
giant gorillas.
but also they grow tails, so they're like embodied. So they're like fully embodied too. They recognize their sort of full humanity, you might say, like they're and they can harness their violent nature in the service of the greatest ideals. And that actually, I think, should be the goal of all education. Just because I'm reading this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I know you're reading now, and there was just a Jordan Peterson video that came out about that, where the authors actually, and I mean, you would expect them to say this, but they said that you should give a copy of this book to every teacher and administrator in K-12 that you know. And I agree, because it's data driven.
I haven't actually read the book. I know that they just talked on the podcast, and so they're definitely going to get a lot more traction, I think. And it clearly is referring back to is Alan Bloom, I think, who wrote the Closing of the American Mind, right? Like 20, 30 years ago now. But yeah, and I haven't read that either, but I know about it. So I sort of know about what you're saying. But I want to, all right, we can talk about that sometime, but I want to look at this character, Heidegger.
Yes, sorry.
And you mentioned earlier that it's like there's a kind of fascist or Nazi thing going on here. And I wonder how particular the choice of this name was for this character, because he follows the he falls into line. He follows the master when he's around, but as soon as Rufus leaves, then Heidegger turns around and tries to take out his frustration on those who are below him in the pecking order. I haven't read much Heidegger. I know that he's controversial because of his historical, like his actual beliefs and practices outside of his writing, but I know that his writing is very like highly regarded in philosophic circles, and it's considered pretty like dense and important and serious. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts about what this character is Heidegger within the game?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because he definitely works for the man and the new sort of Hitler figure, Rufus, and Heidegger had historical associations, not speculative, with the Nazis. And many people believe that put a blight on his thinking, because of course that because of his group identity, that would of course affect what he would think is the idea. And we sort of let that sort of racist slide get away with it because we find the German Nazis at that time so opprobrious with their behavior. But the thing about him that's so interesting is that he's very famous for saying that language is the house of being, but also that language is the limit of your being. And so the fact that he, as part of an authoritarian state, rather than serving the logos, but rather serving a person trying to embody a particular aspect of the logos, in this sort of particular circumstance, the negative father, Rufus, the tyrant, right? Exactly. He has limited his range of expression. He cannot simply speak the truth. He has to become propagandistic, because the truth is not his master. Rufus is his master. And so in order to serve the ends of Rufus, he does not serve the true ends of language, and thus is no true philosopher. And so if that's unconsciously done, that's a major dig on Heidegger. If that's consciously done, that's a major dig on Heidegger.
He's taunted by Rufus for his laugh.
And I thought that was great. That restriction, even on his expression, his most fundamental expression. Bang. Sorry, go on.
No, and it's heartbreaking, and it gives me a great sort of feeling of pathos for the character, though, because a laugh is something which a person doesn't really control.
Right.
That's somehow like the way that Dante would say, you look into someone's eyes and you see their soul. In the same way, the laugh is kind of revealing of the person's soul, and something that is so spontaneous and unguarded, and they're vulnerable in that moment. And that's the thing that Rufus calls him on there. And so in a way, it's understandable that the Heidegger character would turn and try to beat up on the soldiers who overheard that shameful exchange, right? But then again, he's not being much of a leader himself in letting that sort of get to him and taking it out on his underlings that way. So he he's a bizarre character. Some of the characters in this game are just really weird. I don't know. I think
They are.
I gotta think of
Yeah, ha ha ha. He goes.
what. Yeah, yeah, and it's great. It's good. It's a great evil laugh, but it's also just like, well, so he's another one of these characters that you don't get a crack at yet either, right?
Mm,
You don't fight him as a boss here. He's just sort of there and being, you know, nefarious and troublesome and problematic. But you don't get to attack Rufus. You don't get a second shot at him yet either. You have to sort of endure his gaze, and he'll reward you for doing the Simon Says game really well, right? You get one of those prizes that we talked about. So I find that really, it's like it's irking, you know, in the game. You're sort of stuck playing the game between save points, like you've mentioned before.
yes.
It's got this kind of hold on you, where you find yourself sometimes rushing through because you can't just like you can't just endure that, you know. Um, and I find, yeah, the Turks sort of represent that to an extent as well. You find them in the bar in Junon if
Yes.
you go exploring.
Yes.
They're down like, you know, having some serious drink fests going on, and they're also, like you said, those ghosts down there under one of the stores where you can talk to the people back from the training building back in Sector 7, which, you know, so they're somehow they've washed up there to talk to you because you didn't tell them everything you knew, right? They can't return to the planet, they say. Um, it's fascinating how the the little sort of jokes and like little what are they called? Um, when an actor pops up, you know, what's it called? Yeah, the name for that escapes me right now. But those little moments where it brings that thing back,
Yes.
which had its role earlier on, and it sort of haunts you in that way. Yeah, yeah. Did you actually listen to some of those? I didn't go through and redo any of the old ones, and I didn't do many of the new ones either, where Cloud can impart his knowledge to the ghosts. Did you spend some time with those?
No, I just kind of went down there and found it rather odd, and I thought it was cool seeing the Turks gambling, and then
Uh-huh.
seeing how people sort of like try and cheat the system in a totalitarian system. How do they go do that? How, spend their leisure time, because you even get reprimanded, sort of putzing about yourself by a couple of fellow soldiers who say they don't have room to talk. Um, and so they say the ghosts say to you, "Okay, Mister Know-it-all Soldier," which
Hmm.
is already sort of a reference back to that dream you have at the beginning of this chapter of playing that we did, that sort of questions your identity. And it says, well, did you see Tifa a different time from when she was a guide? And do you remember? And Cloud's like, no, I can't really remember. And he's like, well, then why don't you ask her and wake up?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like those moments that you were
That
mentioning, or like the apostrophe in Dante, that are like, wake up, make sure you pay attention here. This is
yeah.
important.
The I think that there's an enemy skill materia down there too, right? So it's like you are rewarded for exploring, as always,
Yes.
even if you don't necessarily listen to every word they say. But the more that you do listen to the words they say, the more interesting and sort of like enthralling, right? The feel, you know, they're ghosts. They're not really scary though. The way that that voice in your own head is kind of scary.
Yeah.
It's eerie,
That music, that
and
off
it
key, dun, 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 it's eerie.
yeah, yeah, that uncanniness of the thing which is familiar and strange, which I think these video games are so potent a carrier for, because you're there in the comfort of your living room, you know, playing this game, which is nostalgic. You played it for years, and yet there's always some element of mystery, even there, right? The unknown pops up like in the strangest circumstances, and that's sort of
Yes. And
in your safe in your home. You're still open to the the creative and the formless, which you can give
Well,
form.
it
Yeah.
certainly affects you affectively. And if anybody were really thinking, then they would understand that this is a great vessel for social change, because the more
Hmm.
emotional reactions you have to an object, the more feelings and thus consciousness and memory, or the more consciousness you thus develop through your conscious suffering of affect in the presence of this thing, which then create associations within you forever with the lessons learned with that thing, right? Like you're getting upset while you play the game, you're getting annoyed, you're making real connections to it, like how you make real connections to, say, your teammates and the shared endeavor because of your shared emotion when you're playing with them. And so a question I have, I'm sort of getting to the big question part of the night.
Okay.
And I do want to make a proposition to you a little bit later, which I think it'll be a sort of fun one. And we can see which way we want to go with it. But
Okay.
but I wonder to what extent using this shared technology of video game development means that the East and the West are for the first time sharing the same artistic form in a sort of a mass-produced way, so that all the world can consume the exact same product in the exact same medium, and thus a sort of melding of mythology, or a development into a new synthesized and sort of, I don't know, world level culture mythology might already be happening to some extent because of the massive use and consumption. Like, I mean, I just think about, like, in the 80s, the giant robot motif that was coming across in like cartoons like Mechs and Transformers and Gundam, of course. And that seems to be like the Power Rangers. That seems to be like the coming together into super states, right? Of super nations. This technological advancement that connects us in a new way that makes us like capable of defeating any anomaly that comes up that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to defeat as a separated entity. And so it makes me think that we're currently observing the process of the development of, say, you might say, the new gods or the new idols of culture or the new prevailing mythos, because people never see what's happening while it's happening, right? And so, like, we do go to these movies with these giant flashing screens with these motifs of heroes on them. And we pay money. We're motivated to do it. It's considered like a good Friday night after, you know, the ages of like 18 to 30. But yeah.
It's something that, yeah, I mean, it's been, I think, a long time in the making. Right, the connections between East and West and the shared mythologies and religions, for that matter, right? And then I think, as you say, that this is different in that it's a new technology which is being developed sort of cooperatively and marketed globally, and it's a medium which is developing not in one place or the other, but across both and bridging both. And I think that the kind of discussion you can have about it is not limited by, but enriched by a knowledge of those underlying mythologies of the different regions. And I think that that's the sort of the new thing that's coming about now, is like recognizing and taking seriously that transcendent sort of touching of deep wells of myth, which is manifested in these games. That seems, yeah, really, really new and exciting to me.
Yeah, that seems like the epic that we will have to write. We'll have to. I think it's almost as if Neil Gaiman's American Gods is sort of a failed attempt at manifesting the new epic, the epic that includes all the bodies of literature, all the great traditions, all the great gods of the past, and this. But also, the key point is that it states the new gods, the coming of the great new ones, the new age, and that this person is the Messiah of the new age, the prophet of the new age, the steward of Gondor, as it were. Aragorn come home with the message. Moses, you know, the person who comes back from the unknown with the message. What the message is who you people are. Bang, those are where the new gods come from. And instead of looking down on them and saying like we're the French fry gods and like the internet dweeb gods, like sort of like Neil Gaiman does, like maybe showing the fact that, you know, we are the generation that will overcome world hunger, right? We are the generation that, you know, will cure many, will go to Mars, right? Will, you know, we are by several metrics in America right now the greatest people that have ever existed economically, in terms of sanitation. I mean, this is a point that Pinker makes, that Haidt makes, that the guy he writes with, whose name I shouldn't forget, Lukianoff, makes, that Ray Kurzweil makes, our advances in technology. I mean, what Kurzweil says is we have in our pockets now cell phones that are, and this is again because of a bridging of East and West technology, right? And of competing and cooperating at the same time, is we have computers in our pockets, cell phones. They're several million times cheaper and something like several thousand times more powerful than the best computer at MIT when Kurzweil was a student there. And it's like, that's that exponential growth. It comes from cooperation with the logos. That's what people forget, that the US, after we defeated Germany and Japan, even though we levied heavy taxes on them, we gave them loans. We helped them rebuild. And look how well that's worked out. Look at what they make for us. Look at how many German automobiles we have and how many scientists of German descent we have, you know, creating vaccines for us and things like that. Look at how well the Japanese are doing and how many of us have, say, Japanese cars and Japanese, so how many of us play things like, you know, how many of us have Sony sound systems, or Samsung phones, or it's incredible. And so what's happened is that in enriching the people around us, even former enemies, we enrich ourselves. You, by giving the people around you a superordinate goal towards which to work, you create a team that is then motivated to help you be successful while also making themselves successful. It seems like a super equilibrated state, right? That seems to be the notion we're going towards. The new sort of constituency, you know. What if instead of just always fighting each other and antagonizing each other, we as a like world level people, still with our regional differences, because that I think makes the world interesting. And I can give a more sophisticated reason for that later, just because I think the more manifestations of being there are, the more you understand being, and so that's useful for cultural diversity. But if, like, say, all the nations in the world directed all their resources towards shared projects, like, I don't know, even something like super pyramids or whatever it could be, we could devote an episode to that, you know, that we would have much less war and sort of anxiety and hate, because we would all have meaning and we would be fighting to like sort of contribute the most possible. And I think that's what the Olympics is sort of a lower level abstraction of. We do want to win all those golds, right? But I think that's where we're trying to get to. I think that's the right way, rather than saying like we hate ourselves as Americans and for these privileges we have. Because, and I think part of why we hate ourselves and have this anxiety is an anxiety of being forgotten, because we have no great deed that we're sharing in. And it's like, well, no, we're actually doing a lot of great things right now. And maybe we should be a little more conscious of that. That would actually improve our lives if we took more responsibility for the fact that we have, you know, the most luxurious and incredible lives of any humans that have ever existed.
Yeah, it's a different kind of perspective entirely from that which is, I guess, popularized or promoted or whatever,
pandered, you know, in the newspapers.
That's probably a word for it. Yeah. So it's like, but again, I think what you're describing is just I think it's a really exciting perspective to take, and one which, makes you feel like you're en route to doing something real and lasting, which I think it's like to look at the game again. It's the difference, right, between a Rufus who has the propaganda and an actual creative force like the double materia sword or something like that, right? Like we sort of skipped over it, but you can also meet Yuffie, the a secret character.
Ah, my
And
great shame. That was something that I guess I wasn't trying to bring up, but as much as you were like, get Yuffie, I refused to look at a strategy guide because my overly rigid method of playing this game at this moment. And I went into a forest and I fought several battles, something like 5 of them, which was a lot for me. And she didn't appear, and I had seemed to recall, even though I wasn't sure, so I thought I should text you, but I didn't. I forgot which forest it was that she was in, and I think I remember that she would show up and steal all your materia, and then you have to like go to Wutai, right? And
this is later. Yeah, no, the first time that you meet her, I think it's just in any forest there. It's sort of a random encounter. But she's a great like image of this east and west thing, right? It's like she sort of mysteriously, and you can say certain things which will make her leave again, but you can also say certain things which will make her stay and be intrigued and want to join your party. Um, and yes, later she will steal all your materia, but that doesn't happen yet. You're okay for now.
what do you
She's
remember the
just kind
gist
of
of some of the things that she says? Because now I remember it as sort of a romance, being so frustrated by that when I was younger and playing through it, and like
uh-huh.
it was sort of like actually talking to a girl when you're like a young man, and like you have all these grandiose expectations, like, oh my gosh, what if she says yes, and I'm going to be the hero, like I'll save her from all the
Yeah.
dangers, I'll be Saint George to the dragons around her, I'll be so great, and you can't even get past like hey, because Medusa is present, right? The great unknown, and the great force of selection is like, ew, you're gross, and you're like, your status way declined. And so it's like with Yuffie too. It's like you make that first misstep, and everything falls apart. And you're like, man, now I got to go through all this work again and get prepared
Yep,
again,
yep.
and make a change
Well,
as well.
there's several fatal things that you can, yeah, so if you come on too strong, she'll definitely go away. And if you so you first initially have to seem kind of standoffish. But if you're too standoffish, if you're too rude, then she'll go away. So you gotta then reel it back in at a certain point and express some interest in this person. um you can't ask her name. That's the last sort of like temptation. If
Ah,
you ask, she won't join the party again. You've messed up, but you're close. And so if you find her again and you do all the steps and then fix that last step, then you do get to input a name and she will follow uh and be part of your group. And she also has a save point there, and if you try to use the save point, she'll get away. So that's the first temptation. uh yeah, she's really an awesome character because a lot of her weapons are long range, and again, on the cargo ship, you can get a double materia growth weapon for her, which is sweet, right? So she's like a great party member to have at that point in the game. But if you don't have her in your party, you find that item, and it's like that gun that you find up in the Tower of Calm. It's a weapon for a party member that you don't have yet, and so you're sort of left wondering, like, what have I messed up at this point to not be able to use this item? Like, what is that mysterious thing? It's an unknown
that's
unknown.
interesting.
Um,
That's all almost as if that's a correlate for in life when opportunities present themselves, but you're incapable of maximizing or grasping them because you haven't developed the necessary tools to either see them or to actually explicitly embody them at that moment. It's like, if like say like for instance, if you're in the financial sector and you're somebody into cryptocurrency, and right now cryptocurrency seems to be by some estimates something that's making a lot of people money, but it gets reported on
uh-huh,
whenever it's losing people a lot of money. And like that's something that
sure.
you can only really be playing with if you have the tools in play already in order to squeeze those opportunities when they rise. Like how to deal in stocks, you understand sort of how the market fluctuates. There's a skill set attached to being able to play that game, right? And
Right.
so it's like life will present you with all of these opportunities, if you have developed specific skill sets to deal with actual definite avenues of life, like soccer and baseball, if you develop these abilities to play and like you learn a couple dances and you say learn how to, I don't know, in a canoe. It's like you have access now to all these different specific skills with specific goals, which then allow you to generalize and see the specific way that each one of these activities lends itself to you embodying the archetype of the hero, and that you are seeking to attain a specific goal or accomplish a specific task, generally in a physical and sort of an often competitive or cooperative way. And in like doing this, you build your character, like your father says, like whether it is rowing the canoe 5 miles or running a half marathon or like playing soccer your best, even though, you didn't have that great a game. It's like all of these things they just have the requisite amount of suffering and human competitiveness in order to refine, I think, that generalized attitude of desire to explore the unknown as much as possible, depending on how much your materia is mastered, and then manifest it in a Patronus-like definite way, right? Like I think that's what a Patronus is in Harry Potter, the definite form of sort of your soul through a great work that inspires a body of thought, and thus enlightens those around you, enables them to use their own sort of thought, and also sort of enlivens and enlightens a field of vision for a time. And so your perspective provides light for other people to follow along a path that develops their capacity to light the path themselves. Sort of like how Dante talks about Virgil as a man who held the candle behind himself so that it lit the path for others without benefiting from it himself. Except for, in this case, you're following the path of someone before, then you're following your own path. And in thus doing, you provide the light that somebody else follows until they develop their own light or consciousness or ability to consciously embody the archetype of the hero.
Yeah. You mentioned before that's a way to sort of make sense of Red 13, with the candle tail. And he's the one, I think he's the first one that you see of your party stowed away on the ship. When you get to the ship and you do your final send off for President Rufus, you see popping up in the background the head of Red 13. He's there. He's sort of like letting you know that you're about to be reunited with the team, and that they're all somehow have made their way up to and onto the cargo ship.
That's interesting. That is like sort of a where the wild things are moment, right? When it's like, don't worry, you don't have to keep doing these monotonous tasks. You're about to be back in the fun world with the fun people, and that's the whole point of the game here. And it's sort of like an ET homage too, right? Like he's like so standing out to you as a player, and yet these people are going about their business like there's not like a big red lion creature stowaway around there. And that is interesting because that does make me think about where the wild things are, where like a kid's like sort of nighttime experience turns into the sort of fantasy and play experience that a child's world often is. And this is in fact what Lukianoff and Haidt argue for in The Coddling of the American Mind, that people need to let their kids play more without them, without coddling them. And that they seem to learn a lot through playing out these narratives. That seems to be the idea of it. That seems to be the idea of sort of Earthbound, and sort of that seems to be part of your idea with bookworm games. That it's like we do it together in society together, and the video games sort of help that. Yeah, go on. I heard you.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting, because that's a bit of a conundrum for me at all times, is to what extent to try to explain a thing and make sense of it, right? And when does that become coddling and maybe cutting off certain avenues for the person to actually discover it and learn about it on their own? But I like that, doing teaching in this way. It's something that's out there, but it's not onerous for people. It's not required reading by any sense, and that's something I always wrestled with teaching great books too, right? So it's like, if I make these things the required book, then isn't that in itself like an additional obstacle to people enjoying it? And that's something that I think is a kind of a problem that I had growing up, and I think a lot of people experience this. Like by its by its being assigned, you automatically are not going to have as rich of an experience with that text or with that, whatever subject it might be. And that's a tricky thing, sort of within the culture to try to address. But one way to do it, at least, is to teach things that are voluntary, right?
Yes.
That are out there for people to discover and find out more about if they're interested, and on their own time and in their own at their own
Well,
pace.
that
So
seems to be
so
part of
yeah.
what first made these video games precious to us, and which is part of why I think they get so viciously criticized by like sort of the alumni of the original experience when they have remakes come out and they're like the magic is gone. It's like, well, that's because the magic was in you, because this is how you spent your limited free time as a young person. You are like Cloud, like being tyrannically told what to do, and there is an actual whistle, which is a bell, like a factory, telling you where to go and to sit in line, and you're learning the rules all day. And then you get like even this very limited and constrained playground where you can explore on your own. And at the time when you are actually imprinting as a young person, that's a very special time, a very special experience, and you bond with the game in a very actual emotive and affective way because of that. Sort of like how you can bond with stuffed animals when you're very young, and any sort of object, right? Like think about homes. They're full of objects that people would prefer did not get destroyed and that they like to look at because they generate some sort of warm or effectively or like good warm feeling, good affect.
That's
Yeah,
that's materia, right? That's the materia, and the magic is kind of a literal way of saying like that's the experience that it conjures, and that you sort of imaginatively evoke each time that you really put your attention into that thing again, and talk about it or tell its story.
oh, that's
Um,
incredible. And that's how you fight the dragons of the day with your friends. You fight the anomalies and the threats together with them through conversation of not only what's present and real, but by using the tools from the past in order to combat the present situation with, perhaps small differences. The battle itself will not be the same, but you can still apply, say, the same tool that worked at that time with perhaps differing effects. And that's like a conversation with friends where most of the things you're talking about are sort of inconsequential and you're pretty sure you're going to get through it, right? Like with these minor characters. But some things you're not even
that's
prepared to deal with, like Heidegger. Yeah. And then,
no,
yeah, go
like
on.
this voice that's asking, that's like doubting you. Why don't you ask Tifa about it, right? And you haven't done it yet. You still haven't had that conversation. So much stuff has happened, um, which which makes it impossible to get to that like very important identity uh, uh, resolving conversation. Yeah.
Right, right. And well, just because of time restrictions, it's looking like I'm going to have to get off here, and we're going to have to do the sort of Dante ineffable or the Aristotle. Oh well, we'll have to return to these topics on another day, and hopefully our listeners at this time and in the future, have a tinge of sadness when we have to sign off like this. But also, hopefully, we produce so much work that they can immediately press next or have autoplay play the next version and hear the new crop of thoughts that we've dug up from the earth and see the new garden we wish to plant today, or the to be more appropriate, the new field we wish to explore in sort of a link like way with opponent. So I was thinking, Wes, I wonder if after this side quest, and I know we can go so many different directions, and perhaps you're even thinking at a more octagonal angle, as Mr. Daniel Babcock would say. But I was thinking, and it just kind of came to me that perhaps Ocarina of Time, Zelda and the Ocarina of Time would be a good next game. I mean, I know we're so far away from that too, but that seemed like, that is one of the great and seminal games.
Yeah, that's one I definitely want to delve into sometime, and that could be the next one. We could do, you know, I know there's definitely a lot of people um, that would want to be involved with that. I think at least. So, yeah, that would be great.
I
Yeah,
know
that
if I
sounds
were
good to
just
me.
to quickly spitball, I know Xenogears and Chrono Trigger would also be pretty cool, but I don't know. That one, I
Sure.
mean, just to show that we don't have a Nintendo bias, or a bias against Nintendo. We're going Sony here with our first one.
I know it's a this is the moment when Squaresoft, which developed the Final Fantasy games, they they put their game on Sony because it had the capacity to like the memory, because it was a CD system, whereas Nintendo made their cartridge system,
Mhm.
and it would have been like an exorbitant amount of cartridges to get this game to actually work. And so they were with Nintendo,
Ah,
right? So the Super
yeah.
Nintendo has Final Fantasy games, but then the developer joined up with Sony in the next generation, and I think that they've since patched that up, but I'm not sure. I don't keep up with stuff as much these days,
Yeah,
so
the old
I don't know.
space race, the new version. Yeah, I do remember that was a driving force. Like some games could only be played on certain systems that had certain, hardware, and that was like a big draw for Xbox. It was even beyond the PlayStation 2, and thus could play games with even superior graphics. And then even your friends who played the game that was across platforms, they had kind of the bad graphics. I remember that from like the Nintendo Powers when they would compare the Nintendo and the Sega shots, and I thought that was so cool seeing like how like Ryu's stage in Street Fighter 2 was like would have like a red sunset on the one version or but be at night, or have like a purple sunset on the other, and I was like, that's so cool, those little
Yeah,
changes. It'd be so cool to go to somebody's house and see those small little differences. And maybe that is what's so cool about developing a sophisticated and differentiated personality, right? That it's the small nuances, those small little pockets of color, of experience, of embodiment, of unique embodiments and articulation and representations that a person produces. It gives you the great pleasure of being in the sort of presence of a creative or endeavor, or something created by the logos, something created by that which is the uniquely adapting function of a human. That gives you pleasure.
that's yeah, that's like, I think, in a nutshell, like the argument for the humanities, and by more directly for studying video games, like actually thinking about interpreting this new medium. Yeah, that's
Well,
awesome. Sounds
as,
good.
as people start picking us up, I think they'll see more and more value. And I think to some extent the value is in the highest expression that you attain. And at some point this will have all been great practice for our even better work that we'll be able to do. But at this point it's the limit of our being. And so I think it
Hmm.
will stand and have its own value for being what it is, and for us
Yes.
being what we are, because this gives, I think, meaning to our life, and our search for meaning for our people and our culture.
Right on. Yeah, well, thanks for the time, and that sounds like a good next side quest when we get to it,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a
only one
while.
at a
But
time. And I think that's funny because you always used to get on me and still do about starting and not stopping books and starting and not stopping projects, like my Iliad project, which I need to finish my sabbatical from, and give
uh-huh.
definite form to, just as you've done with your first project, sort of pulling a tortoise to my hair, and now making me understand the meaning of a hair-brained scheme, one that doesn't think through, getting to the goal. It's just thought up very quickly and then sort of given up. Um, and so hopefully I can be a little more tortoise-like as we move forward.
You gotta, I mean, you've got to sort of obey your own nature, though, right? Like, who knows what great dreams the hare was having while he was taking his nap. So that's a story for another
that
time, I
that who
guess.
is having? Sorry, I killed a bug just as you said that.
The
The
hare,
hair.
the
That's a good
hare.
point. And you do need time to reflect and dream. And it's interesting as you do more actions in a day to what extent those are the dreams of your other actions. Those are the reflections of your other actions. That your life becomes sort of a reflection of your thought. And maybe that's where we have to leave off because I got to go eat some euro. Uh,
Okay.
I'll see you later.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.